You guys have asked me a bunch of questions here on YouTube and Twitter. In today's video, I'll be giving you those answers. Welcome to April's Q&A. If you guys have questions for me, feel free to post it down below in the comment section, or later you can post on the community post, Twitter, Instagram, email, it does not matter. Let's jump into question number one. And this is going to be from Jason on Twitter. He says, I have a question. What's tougher to find, Lone Jacks or Goodwin Champs? Now, here's the deal. There's a lot of Lone Jack sets out there. Well, not a lot. There's a handful of them. My assumption is he's talking about Lone Jack Inventors, although we'll also briefly talk about the Lone Jack N370 set, which is a mixture of baseball players as well as non-sports historical figures. Easy answer on this one. Lone Jacks are going to be much tougher. And both of those sets, whether it's the Lone Jack Inventors or the N370s, you're looking at a pop of anywhere from like 5 to 10 at most for these sets, whether on the N370s it's a baseball player or the historical figures. And some of these I have saved searches for on eBay. They barely populate. Goodwin Champs, again, is a very scarce set in comparison to a lot of like what you see with baseball cards, where sometimes there's thousands that are graded. Most of those you're going to see anywhere from like 50 graded all the way up to 100, maybe a little bit more. Now, in all fairness, there could be some that are going to be resubmitted multiple times because people do crack out cards and try to get a different grade. But in reality, I do see a lot more Goodwin Champs walking around card shows. Whereas if you even walk around a card show like the National, you'll be lucky to find a Lone Jack Inventor. I know there's a few dealers that set up with non-sports and they barely see them. Most of the baseball dealers there that even work specifically on pre-war have no idea what Lone Jack Inventor cards are. They might know the Lone Jack N370s, but they're not carrying any of the non-sports side of things. So to answer this question, Lone Jack's much tougher to find. Up next, this is from Og's Cards, John. We've done a lot of deals when I used to travel around the United States and go to card shows. He says, I have one. As non-vintage prices have surged, should collectors expect them to stabilize or prepare to spend even more? I do sports comparisons a lot, and it gets tricky considering limited populations and that these go away after a dealer sells them. So this is a very tricky question. On the surface, it seems quite easy to answer, but there's a lot of factors at play. And John even alluded to it towards the bottom of the statement, right? He says over here, it gets tricky considering limited populations, which not to always trust pop reports, especially on international issues, because a lot haven't been graded as of yet, even for common sets. But for a lot of the US-based non-sports stuff, they're fairly accurate for when you get to the pre-war side of things. I know probably 50s, 60s, and 70s, they're not as of yet. But when you jump back into cards that were produced, 1940 or earlier, they're pretty reasonable on that side of things. But the second part of it is where I struggle with it, because he says, and that these go away after a dealer sells them. I don't want to have this sound elitist, but it does seem like on the vintage non-sports side of things, and I'm mostly talking about like 1930s, 20s, 10s, 1800s cards. A lot of the collectors, when they purchase a card, they have zero desire to resell it, which is good and bad in a few places. Well, the good thing is like there is a collecting community. People actually want to collect these cards. It's not hot potato like when you go into the modern side of things. But additionally, on that side of things, you're not going to see a lot of pops, or not a lot of pops, but not a lot of sales, right? Some cards may only sell every 5 years or every 10 years. And it's really tough to gauge where the market is going to value a card if it hasn't gone to auction in a while. Even something that hasn't sold in a year, the market has changed completely. A classic example of that just happened is the 1924 Men of Genius Albert Einstein. So over a year period, I believe a 7 doubled in value. And these are very tough cards, by the way. I know a few have been selling over the last year across all grades, right? But it's typically a tough card to find. And what happens with that? People buy it and they put it into their own personal collection. So, the side of it with a dwindling population and also a little bit more interest, I can see these cards going up. Obviously, it's tough to gauge the market now with other external factors being added to it. But I also do see a lot more people from the baseball side migrating to vintage non-sports. Right now, I see this either being in two approaches. I do see a lot of people going into like superhero cards. So like Superman stuff has been on fire. Specifically, even talking to dealers that set up 1940 Superman #1, a lot of people want that card when they're jumping into the non-sports space. But I also see this happening a lot with presidents, specifically Lincoln and Washington. Some other big names have gone up a little bit, but those two have been specifically on fire. So to answer this question, I still think there is room for the vintage non-sports market to grow. Will it stabilize? I still think some aspects of that market is cheap. Some are already kind of expensive, but we'll see what happens over the next year. Hopefully that makes sense and I didn't ramble too much. All right, so this comes from PT4563. What do you find to be more optimal long-term flipping strategy? High velocity, low margin, think $10 Jordans, or low velocity, high margins, think rare cards of second tier Hall of Fame players. All right, well, you could technically do the math on it. So imagine you have a $10 item with 10% margin, right? If you sell that 6 times a year, you're going to bring back $6. Now, this strictly assumes that other profits aren't used to invest once again, and you can still move that money to other items or take the cash out if you really want to, right? As you sell the item, you can take the cash out. So what this in this case would be a simple annualized margin of 60%, right? You have $10 at the end of the year, you would have $16, assuming the card constantly sells like every 2 months. But let's assume that you're going to reinvest, right? So what you'd use the term is compound annualized margin, and you take 1 plus 0.1, right, or 10% margin, raise it to the 6, subtract 1, you get a 77.2% annualized margin when it's compounded. Now let's take the $10 item at 50% margin sold once a year, right? You'd bring back $5. Now the one bad part of this is you're stuck with that item. You might have less competition selling that item because it might be a rare item or different things like that, but you are stuck with that card. But on the pro side of things, right, you might be able to sell it faster than a year. Someone's been searching for that card, but also it could take 2 years. But again, 50% margin, if we assume that over a year, $5. But what I find sometimes with a little bit rare cards that are cheap in bargain bins, you will find more than a 50% margin on that side of things. So this kind of just breaks it down, right? If it takes a year, just take your margin percentage. If you have 10%, right, you can compound it to 77.2%. Technically, this is probably a little bit safer, although people can technically undercut you. This has a potential to make a lot more, right? I just assume 50% margin. But you do have the downside if you're being stuck with the item. That's just some quick math on it. There's a lot of theories that you could use. But 1994. Hey, Ryan, great job with your first Q&A. Well, I really appreciate it. I wanted to ask you, when you're at card shows, how much of your time and strategy is spent on the dollar box bargain bins and lower end cards versus more expensive ones? That's a funny one, but I'll go into that in a second. What are some of the cards players you're currently holding for the long term? Thanks, Ryan. All right, so strategy. Typically, I would recommend not going to the bargain bins right away because showcase cards tend to be picked over quite easily. So let's say you're walking around a show, right? A dealer has, I don't know, 20 or 30 cards in a showcase. Well, most people aren't going to go diving into a bargain bin, and not everyone that goes into bargain bins will know the value of the cards, right? Because they're typically cheaper cards. Whereas someone walking around the shows, especially those that buy for other people, they're going to look at the showcases first, go showcase to showcase, and try to make deals there. So if you're looking for like a card that's $50, $100 plus, typically those are going to be in showcases. And yeah, you can make some pretty good margin on that side of things. Those are the ones that are going to be picked first. So typically you want to hit those up first rather than bargain bins. But sometimes I make the mistake of going into bargain bins first and just staying at a bargain bin for a while. And the reason why sometimes I'll go through a bargain bin is it's a lot less work for me after I buy a bunch of cards. Yes, it is a lot of work, building out a stack and making a deal, but you will find you get some pretty good margins on bargain bins. And sometimes you'll find $20 or $30 cards that get slipped in for $1 or $2 if you know the market really well. Additionally, I just send all my bargain bin stuff over to check out my cards, and I don't have to deal with any shipping, don't have to deal with a bunch of stuff, right? Send it over there, price it, and then I'm done with it. So all those eventually add up to a larger card. But like realistically, I would suggest going showcase shopping first and then going into bargain bin, unless you know a dealer at the show has phenomenal bargain bins and that they are just loaded. Maybe if you're already going to look at a showcase, then you look into a bargain bin really quick and you can combine both strategies, which I find that to be really, really helpful. But bargain bins, you're going to find bigger margin than the showcases, but showcases you'll find more expensive cards. So sometimes it's easier to take a card from 100 to 120 than to make an extra $20 in a bargain bin. Uh, Again, depends how much time you have at a show and your strategy for exiting the cards, right? If you have a COMC account, send all your bargain bin stuff over there. Otherwise, it might be easier just selling one card rather than selling all those additional cards. The second side of things is like, what are some cards and players that you are currently holding for long term? There's a few different strategies at play on here. So predominantly right now, my card portfolio or stuff that I'm holding long term is non-sports, specifically things that I find as quite rare, whether they're in the specific grade or set. Um, I I feel like a lot of international stuff is quite undervalued within the community still. A lot of people just don't appreciate that. Whereas that has changed within the baseball card community. Baseball card, a lot of people focused on American first cards. But over time, it has changed. Like a lot of people want to find stuff out of South America. People want to find cards out of Japan. Right now, I think in the non-sports world, we still have that same mindset of we want to find pre-war cards that are American focused, which isn't an issue, right? Because a lot of these are really, really tough. But a lot of people ignore tough cards that are overseas. And look, I'm not the best person to say what cards are the toughest in all these different countries because, like, even jumping into a country like Japan or Germany or anywhere in Europe that's produced cards, there's a lot of nuance involved with it. And there's sets that I have not even heard of. And I'm sure the grading companies have never seen before. And maybe there's a pop one or pop two that even exists within that country, right? But that's where I find a lot of long-term stuff will be overseas. It's not really well documented as of yet. And, you can find a lot of historical figures that are still in America on that. I know the non-sports collectors focus American first. I think that's going to change a little bit. But kind of the second part of the question is, what am I holding? Again, with non-sports, a lot of historical figures, right? Whether that's inventors or presidents, but I also like music quite a bit. So I go after a lot of rock and metal bands for my own personal collection. All right, up next, EDM Boy 7779. What's your price range you're looking at card shows to flip and put on COMC? This kind of goes back into the previous question. I find COMC so far works the best for cards anywhere from like $2 to around maybe $50 to $75. I have been actually testing a little bit on the higher end side of things. I actually just sold a T206 Walter Johnson on COMC. Now that's my first four-figure card that I've sold on the platform. I'm going to try some others in the future and I can update this question, but primarily my range that I sell on there is $2 to $99. When I flip on the site, I will go for some cheaper stuff, but I don't think it's really worth adding in cards under $2 just because of the 50-cent insertion fee. And plus you still have to buy a card at the show, right? So like imagine you buy a card for $1, then you have 50 cents on there. So you have 25% margin. COMC does take 5% from any sales, but really I'd focus $2 more. If you see a card in a dollar bin that you think sells for over $2 in COMC, put it off to the side and then start building your stack on that. Not to say don't ignore like dollar cards and stuff like that, because I have bought stuff like that at card shows. And this is kind of just future stuff. Like I was buying from a bin that were quarter cards, and I don't think these were worth it for COMC, but even like a Prism refractor of Jose Altuve or Jose Ramirez, or like a Miguel Cabrera sepia, right? Or this is black and white. I don't know. One of those variants. Like I looked these up on COMC, and they're not that $2 threshold. But I know if I set up as a dealer, I feel like these are easy dollar cards. So I still added them into my stack. But really for COMC, $2 plus. Is the 1933 reprint of Nap Loway worth anything? So there are reprint cards that people go after quite a lot. The most common one that I like to tell people about is the 1983 Mickey Mantle. It's the first reprint by Topps of the 52 Mantle. Actually, they've reprinted the whole 1952 set. So technically there are other bigger names that still sell pretty well, the Jackie Robinson and Eddie Matthews in particular. But the 1933 Loway, I don't think it's going to be a high value card. I think there was reprints in the 80s also of the 33, 34 Gaudi sets, if I remember correctly. Now, Lajoie is a premier card within the 33 set because it technically didn't exist. You had to write to the company and they printed it out. It has a mixture of 33 and 34 design. But the issue with Lajoie is a lot of the, I wouldn't say like non-advanced collectors don't know the impact of that card, um, which kind of sucks because it really should be more popular than it is. But most common collectors don't know about it, and I find a lot of those people are the ones that try to buy reprints of like a Honus Wagner or a Babe Ruth or a Mickey Mantle. So is it worth anything? Yeah, it's there's probably someone out there that wants to have a reprint, whether they have a lot of 33 Gaudis and they know they're not going to get the Lajoie because it's quite expensive, or someone just wants to have that reprint. So it is worth something, but it's not going to be worth a ton of money. And like on the reprint side of things, 83 Mansell, 1952 tops, that is quite expensive in the reprint side of things. Also, I should mention that sometimes when tops had refractors of reprinted cards, those can get quite expensive, especially on the basketball side of things. But you'll find that happening also on baseball. Some of those get pricey, just depending on what the card is that's being reprinted. Next question. This is from Mule Mule. I own the 66 Batman in the 9 reference, but not shown here. Monumental dream come true. That is a seriously impressive card. I will say that. I'm also curious, right? People's top 3 places to buy and sell non-sports card. Excellent channel, no hype or filler, just fun, solid info. Well, I appreciate that a lot. So let me give you kind of my resources on that side of things for online. I think the easiest one to mention is going to be your marketplaces, right? So whether it's like an eBay or COMC, that's probably where I purchase the most of my cards at. Additionally, we have a Facebook group for vintage non-sports card collectors. I've done some deals on there. The third place I would just say is networking. Once you get to know people, whether it's like on a social media platform like Twitter or Instagram or even like the Facebook group, you can source a ton of cards. People send me cards all the time asking if I want to buy them or not. And I've been able to build out my non-sports card collection by doing that. So marketplaces, right? eBay, COMC, or even like auction houses. Then you look at Facebook and then kind of networking on that. There are also international sites out there. I haven't really focused on them too much. There's sometimes there's going to be language barriers also. It can be kind of sketchy sometimes shipping overseas on that side of things. I've had some horror stories on that, which maybe I'll bring that up in another video if anyone asks. But yeah, that's kind of my places on that. And I'd love to know also other places that people buy or sell non-sports cards as well, because it's kind of a small community, and I'm always, like I said, trying to grow my collection. ACD says that George Bush card is definitely pricey. He's talking about the 1990 Tops one. We recently featured it in the top non-sports sales for April. And he says, cool image though. What do you think a PSA 10 would sell for? So I actually thought a little bit about that. You know, what would it sell for? The 6 sold for $11,000. And I could be wrong, but I feel like that's pretty close to another 1990 iconic card, which is the Frank Thomas no name on front. Now, here's the cool thing about this comparison, and you're gonna have to follow with me, right? Let's assume that these cards are equals. Although I think the George Bush is a bit rare, but more people probably want the Frank Thomas no name on front. The no name on front actually sold at auction, and that in a 10, I believe, sold for $170,000. Now, the George Bush, I don't think would fetch $170,000. But I do think it would be a six-figure card. It's really, really iconic within the hobby, has a really cool story associated with it. I think there's enough hype out there that someone with a lot of money would go into buying that card, especially since it's a crossover between the non-sports world as well as the baseball card world. You have the presidential side of things. So you have a lot going for that card. Also kind of in that junk wax era where there isn't a ton of cards that are worth a lot of money in there. So I could see that going for 6 figures. Where it would land though, I couldn't tell you. A lot of these type of whale cards that maybe that there's one out there, all it takes is 2 bidders to keep bidding each other up. And that card could go from 100 to 170. Or on the other side of things, if there's only one person with a lot of money that wants that card, it could be a $50,000 or $60,000 card. But if I was to give an estimate, I would say anywhere from 100 to 150. And that's a wrap on our second Q&A. Thanks, guys, for watching this video. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We're going to do one every month. Leave your comments down below. for the May Q&A, and I'll see you there.